to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Moses Murengezi. I work here in the Ministry of Energy and the Mineral Development, and my title is Advisor to the Chairman of the Energy and Mineral Sector Working Group. Yes.
Oh, sorry. You have more to say. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering whether you understand what that means, Chairman of the Energy and Mineral Sector Working Group, because that is a rather unusual title in the government. But generally, the Energy and Mineral Sector Working Group comprises of donors within the sector, together with the government, that is the ministry here, Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Finance. And so we plan together to see how to take the sector forward in terms of energy development, mineral development, the areas of oil, so that we move in a coordinated manner. So the chairman is the permanent secretary of this ministry, and I am advisor to the PS in that regard. Yeah.
It's a very unique position, I have to say. Been in 8 countries, I haven't seen such a position. So
That's true. That's why I had to explain what it is, because it is rather unusual. That's true. It's rather unusual. But in Uganda here, the sector working groups are not unusual. You find them almost in every ministry, in the health sector, in the education sector, in works. Wherever you have several donors working within that sector, you tend to have that working group as a way of coordinating that sector so that the different players move in the same direction.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to remember this, what you shared, and come back.
Yes, sure.
While we're doing our interview, because I think there's an interesting question, but there needs to be a time when I will ask.
Sure. It's welcome, yes.
Right now, I would like
Yes.
you to share what was Moses like as a little boy. You're now Mr. Murengezi, but
Yes.
you were a little boy once
Yes.
upon a time.
Yes.
Growing up in your little town.
Yes.
What was it like? Can you paint us the picture?
Yes. It was not a little town, it was a deep, typical African village that I grew up in a place called Kiseke, on the side of Lake Murengezi in Kisoro district. At that time, it was not Kisoro district, it was Muregezi district. That's where I was born in 1954. So I was born to a peasant family. So I grew up as a typical African village boy, growing up, looking after goats, sheep, cows in the village. And then I started my primary school in 1962. That's when I entered my primary school. At that time, I remember when I started primary school, I didn't even have shorts. I had on a shirt, and there was nothing else down. It was just a shirt. That's how I entered my primary school. So that is how I started, and that's how I was as a small boy. A typical African boy, down there in the village, tilling the land, helping the parents do this and that, fetching water, collecting firewood, and then, of course, looking after the goats and the sheep and the cows.
And you remember your mother cooking, I'm sure?
Yes.
And you have a favorite dish that she was cooking?
Yes.
What was that?
Typically sweet potatoes. I used to enjoy sweet potatoes. They are starchy, and when you roast them, they are a bit crunchy. That's what I used to enjoy most. Otherwise, cooking, yes, in the village, you had these 3 stones, and then you get the food, you put in either in a pot. At that time, it was mainly pots, or an aluminium saucepan. Then you cook the food. Then it is served to the children of the family. And typically in Africa, we would eat in the same plate, in one plate. They were not separate plates. We would eat together. They put in one plate, and we all share together.
And in the evenings, as you
Can I
would...
just interrupt briefly? Because there was the phone ringing when you were describing the where you would the cooking would happen. Would you
Okay.
just describe that one more time to make sure that we...
For the cooking element? Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Maybe we should have removed the phone, it's fine.
No, it's
But in offices, phones will be ringing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was saying about the cooking. My mother would typically be cooking on 3 stones, the typical 3 cook stove, and she would cook in a pot, typically a clay pot, and sometimes in an aluminium saucepan, and she cooks the food and gives us together, the children, and we eat together. They would put it in one plate, not separate plates like it is these days, that each child has his or her own plate. No, in the village it was one plate, and we all eat together in that same plate. Yes.
And in the evenings, would you get together around the bonfire? Or,
Yes.
And who was the storyteller in your family?
Yes.
Is there a storyteller?
That's a very good one. Typically, we were all storytellers. My mother would begin by telling us stories, and then she would encourage you to tell your own story later on, or to repeat a story she told you maybe a week ago. It was part of the learning, really. So each one was encouraged to tell a story. Or maybe you went visiting your grandparents or your cousins, and you learned a new story. You come and tell the new story to your family. So it was quite an interesting time in the evening. Yeah, a lot of storytelling. Then we have got this system of, now I don't know how to call it in English, it's kind of proverbs. You say, this does that, then people say what means. Yeah? So we used to have that kind of exchange, We call it ibisakuzo, usakuza. Yeah.
So do you remember any of that?
Uh,
Can you share one, either a story or a proverb?
a story?
Yeah.
Now I don't remember those stories, but there are very many.
Maybe one that shaped you.
Stories, talk about stories of typical about animals, say about the rabbit and the hyena. The story goes that one time the rabbit, we took the rabbit as a very clever animal, very, very clever animal. So the rabbit said to Mr. Hyena, Mr. Hyena invited the rabbit and said, let's go to visit our in-laws. So the in-laws of Mr. Hyena. So rabbit said, okay, Mr. Hyena, let's go together. Now, let's say what our names are. So Mr. Rabbit said, my name is Visitor, or in the vernacular called Abajenyi, the visitor. So he said, Mr. Hyena, for you are called Mr. Hyena, that's your name. So they went to the in-laws of Mr. Hyena. So when they reached there, in African tradition, the in-laws, you don't mention them by name. No. You always try to describe them. So when they reached there, the in-laws would say, let's take food to the visitors. Then Rabbit would say, you see, that food is mine. You wait for yours, Mr. Hyena. Because when he was come, they would say, let's take food to Mr. Hyena. So he brought the food, and Rabbit ate all the food. They brought the drinks, said, let's take food, drinks to the visitors. And again, Rabbit said, you see, that's for me, that's not yet for you. So after visiting, at the end of the day, they went back. Mr. Hyena was very, very hungry. He hadn't eaten anything, hadn't drunk anything. But Rabbit was very, very satisfied and was very happy. What happened was, when they reached home, Mr. Hyena divorced his wife. And that was the end of the story. Mr. Hyena divorced his wife and his family perished. So those are the kinds of stories that they will tell. In other words, they are teaching you that in the future, be careful how people can come to destroy your own home. They will do a lot of tricks, and they can destroy your home like the rabbit destroyed the home of Mr. Hyena. So that's one typical story that we would tell in the evening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really
Yes.
and the more
Yes.
at home.
Yes.
Mr. Murengezi,
Yes.
now let's travel to where you went to senior
Yes.
school, and
Yes.
that's where you met your Peace Corps volunteers,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Your first impressions. Maybe first, did you hear that they were coming, or did you just see them there? And what were your first impressions?
Yes. First of all, from primary school, I went to secondary school, and going to secondary school for us was a big change. Because in primary school, we are day students. We go to school and come back home. Now, after primary school, that was 7 years, then you go to secondary school, and now secondary school, you are resident in the
Just ask you to back up one sentence to say you go from primary school to secondary school and now you're a resident.
Yes, so in primary school, we are day students. In other words, you go to school in the day, and at night you're at home, doing those ordinary things at home, fetching water, firewood, and those kinds of things, evening talking to your family and so on. But now, when you finish primary school after 7 years, you go to secondary school. And secondary school, you are now resident in the school. You were a boarding school. At that time, it was mainly boarding schools. These days, there are few day schools in secondary school as well. But at that time, it was mainly the boarding schools. And now we are in the secondary school, and we are boys, only boys. Most schools were separated at that time. You either had a boys' school or a girls' school. Very few were mixed, very, very few. They were there, mainly of the Anglican Foundation, the Protestant Church, but the Catholic Foundation schools were mainly separated. The boys alone, the girls alone. So I was in a boys' school naturally, and a resident, and I was in a senior 1. I got used to secondary school, and senior 2, I think that's when we encountered the first group and the only group of Peace Corps we got anyway. You're asking me, were we informed that we have American Peace Corps coming? No. No, we only saw teachers coming. And the teachers came and they introduced themselves to us. And actually, I came to know that they are Peace Corps later. But otherwise, for us, they were teachers. But we knew these are Americans. We knew Americans because of two things. One, the accent. The accent, you had this American accent, especially the accent of Mr. Karl Murhausen. It was really American. His wife, Mrs. Murhausen, the accent was more, much easier. It was more rich English. But for Mr. Karl Murhausen, his was real American, and so we knew these Americans. But also we knew America anyway. Even from primary school, we used to see films. There used to be a film going around, and the community would all go to see. We knew English. We could talk English in P6, P7, but American English was always difficult. You had to listen very carefully to pick one or two words. And now here they are our teachers. We must listen to every word they say, otherwise you won't pass your examinations. Yeah, there was also another Peace Corps, Mr. Ginell. Mr. Ginell, his English was also real American, and we used to make fun of him, We used to make, the way he says, "My name is Ginell." Then Mr. Murhausen told us, "My name is Murhausen. It means meal houses." And that one I have never forgotten it. It means meal houses. It is from German, that means meal houses. So that's how we came to interact with the Peace Corps, and they were our teachers, yes.
Could you please share maybe a story, maybe a word that Mr. Mulhausen or Mrs. Mulhausen or Janelle, maybe a word they were pronouncing in a funny way that stuck with you, or a concept they were trying to explain? I would like to go with you into the classroom.
Yes.
How did you view them as teachers, and
Yes.
What stuck with you?
What struck me with me, of course, was especially the accent. We tried to learn American English now. Mr. Carl Murhausen, and that time I didn't know he was the first name was Carl. We only knew him as Mr. Murhausen, and he was Mr. Murhausen. That was all. But his method of teaching chemistry was really very good. It was extremely practical. I can't remember exactly the areas he taught us, but what I know is his teaching of chemistry was extremely practical. His wife, Mrs. Murhausen, was teaching us English language. And in teaching us English language, what I do recall is that she would encourage us to write stories. I remember one particular one. She told us to write, to imagine that you are coming from the village and you are a sick person and you are going to a hospital. And our school, Mutore Secondary School, had a hospital adjacent to the school. So she told us to write and how you would feel like your experience. So I wrote the story, and in my story I explained how I would feel coming from the village. You know, our floors weren't cemented, it was dirt floor, and now going to a very hard floor. And I think I explained many things in that story. And she used to mark us out of 20, and she gave me 20 out of 20.
Wow.
I still remember that very vivid in my mind. Yes, yes.
How made that you feel?
Sorry?
How did you feel when you got 20 out of 20? Did
I
you
was-
share that with your parents? Did you go home and say
No.
no?
Well, remember I told you I'm from the peasantry family. In the village, even if you explain to them that I got 20 out of 20, that doesn't mean much to them actually. What matters to them is, will you pass to go from here to there? You know? But she even read my story for the class. So the class was really very happy with me, and they were very impressed. Yes, so I discussed it with my friends, yes.
Mr. Murengezi, Peace Corps has a lot of friends that are not friends, or critics rather, and
Yes.
they would say that also what you are sending all these volunteers
Yes,
to Uganda
Yes.
in this case.
yes,
There has been no impact.
yes,
No skills have been passed.
yes.
What would you tell these critics? How would you answer them?
I think those critics are really wrong. They are really wrong. In my view,
If I could just interrupt, could I ask you to say, I think that the critics that say that there have been no skills passed, for example, just to rephrase.
Repeat that.
oh, okay.
Just for people who won't have heard what.
Okay,
Thank
fine.
you so much.
Welcome. I think the critics who say that Peace Corps have no impact in areas in which they serve, I think those critics are wrong. Because from my own experience, education is also opening you up to the rest of the world. That when you grow up and you become a mature person, you are able to deal with the rest of the world in a manner that allows people to communicate with each other. And as I told you, our interaction with the Peace Corps in Mutorere, that was my first meeting with any American in my life. And now I started learning American English, and even learned it, and I got to know it now. I could listen and communicate with Americans. But besides, even the academics, we benefited quite a lot. Remember, this is a time when we had a scarcity of teachers. And now we got these good teachers, they come and teach us, and I think they contributed immensely into transforming us and making us what we are today. If we are good citizens of the world, then certainly the Peace Corps contributed a lot to making us better citizens of the world. And so that's why I believe that, to me, they are doing a lot of work to contribute towards a better society.
So maybe tied to that, because Mr. Murengezi, you read an article,
Yes.
you saw the name of your teacher,
Yes.
the ambassador
Yes.
of the United States to Uganda
Yes.
has written.
Yes.
And that's how you came forward and said, oh, this was also my teacher. But would you share when you read that article, your
Yes.
emotions? And then what made you to reach out? Because we have many teachers, and
Yes.
okay, they taught and we pass on.
Yes. That's true. But remember, we had the three Episcopes teaching us, Mr. Morhausen, Mrs. Morhausen, and Mr. Ginel. There were other teachers we had, say you'd have one American teacher. There was Mr. Youngman, there was another one, I don't remember his name. But one teacher would come and go away. But these were the three teachers, and so we saw them as a group, and it keeps in a memory. It sticks in memory. You had the group of teachers, the three Americans. So for me, I had wanted always to meet them. And actually one time I tried to look for them on internet. I have been to America several times, to California, to Washington, to New York, and I had, wherever we went to America, I said, but you know, my teachers are somewhere inside there. And so when I saw the picture in New Vision, I said, hey, but this is my teacher. I said, why don't I say hello to my teacher? It's not unique to them. I always say hello to my teachers, actually. Even those in Uganda here, I always say hello to them. But particularly them, I think they impressed me a lot as very good teachers. So I had always wanted to meet them, yes.
So now I will come back to that question, and I said it's very important in your unique position
Yes.
at this ministry,
Yes.
Energy, and
Yes.
you're an advisor in a very unique position.
Yes.
The journey that you have taken, the
Yes.
exposure that you have had to years, and
Yes.
I'm sure the values and the stories.
Yes.
Would you say that had anything to do where you are today? Because you're advising and you're dealing with a lot of other nationalities, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
To ensure that those new type of technologies come to Uganda,
Yes.
or the resources that are in Uganda
Yes.
are used wisely.
Yes.
Did that Peace Corps experience help you to get here? And if it did, in what way?
I think so, because you know, at the end of the day, you had to compete. You had to compete at that time, and the education in Uganda, these days it has become a bit tilted, but at that time it was really very good. Remember, I'm coming from the village down there, southwestern Uganda, and you have to compete with the rest of the country. These days, you find students from such schools are not having opportunity to reach where I reached. Maybe, and most likely, because they are not having good teachers. But here I am, I got the three members of the Peace Corps teaching us. You know, you can't be specific. That is this they gave you. But they certainly contributed to the body of knowledge that allowed you to pass your high school and enter university. Because remember, this was a competition. And when I finished my ordinary level in Mutolere, where they taught me, I went to high school. What did I study in high school? I studied physics, chemistry, and mathematics. Mr. Karl Morhausen had taught me chemistry. Mr. Ginel had taught me mathematics. So you can see the three subjects I took, each one of them had been a contribution from the members of the Peace Corps. And let me tell you, if I hadn't taken those three, I think I would have read English and history. And you can see the contribution of Mrs. Morhausen would also come there. So the knowledge they gave me helped me to take another step You know, you must, at that time, and mind you, it's not like these days. These days, there are very many private schools. If you don't qualify to go to a government school, you can take another channel through a private school. At that time, it wasn't there. You had to pass your senior 4 in order to qualify to go to high school. And after high school, you had to pass in order to go. At that time, it was only one university in Uganda, the Makerere University. So you had to have that knowledge which enables you to pass and reach there. If you didn't, you were out. So maybe, I'm sure if they hadn't taught us, it would have been difficult for us to compete. And you see it these days. In those rural schools, hardly anybody is making it to the university. And actually here we keep asking those questions. Look, we grew up in the same place, under the same circumstances. How come we were able to come from there, and these days nobody's coming from there? I think it's because there are no teachers, there are no good teachers. But for us, we're lucky to have that contribution of the different teachers, including the Peace Corps, and so we are where we are.
Mr. Murengezi, you mentioned that before the Peace Corps volunteers came to Kisoro,
Yes.
You were exposed to America or Americans through movies.
Yes.
Now, when you met real Americans,
Yes.
were some of your understandings of what is to be an American
Yes.
different once you met the Peace Corps volunteers, or maybe they were not different? You said, I saw them in movies and they act just as in life too, the same way.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
America became more real. It became more real. You know, when you see them in the movies talking that American English, you think maybe they are making it. But when you have the teacher teaching in that same English, you know, now this is real. This is real. So to me, America became more real. And yes.
And what values, maybe, sometimes I ask my colleagues or people that I interact,
Yes.
how do you see Americans? Some of them will say, maybe they are hardworking or they are too direct. How did you discover Americans? What values did you see that made you think maybe, or
they are more practical in teaching. The way they teach was much more practical. You know, you have some teachers who will come and teach you a story, and he's teaching science, but he's teaching it as if he's teaching a story with no backup experiments. But the way America does the teaching is really different. You have even American books, when you read the books written from America, they are different. They try to make the subject real. They unfold it the way it is so that you have much better understanding. So that's how I saw America, and to me it's no wonder that America remains ahead in the scientific area, because they are much more practical. They do their things in a very practical way. Yeah.
And if you ever had a chance to talk to American people,
Yes.
what would you tell them in terms of Peace Corps? What they should know that Peace Corps is doing in Uganda? Should they support? Should they not support? Should they be proud of it? Should they not be? What would you tell them?
It's not true. What should I tell them? I have already told them, actually. I meet Americans quite a lot. I meet them in my position here as advisor to the chairman of Energy and Mineral Sector Working Group. And I have told many Americans how I was taught by Peace Corps and how they contributed to shaping me into what I am. And that's why I really appreciate what they did to me. And that's why when I saw the photograph of Mr. Karl Mulhausen in the newspapers, I said, hey, here he is, let me say hello to him. And I'm glad when we started talking on email, he was quite warm. We have been communicating on email. So really me, I value a lot. And to me, if this Peace Corps work can continue, it would help a lot in a better understanding of people all over the world. Uh, of course, people say that they look at America as the policeman of the world. Now that's at the political level. But you know, if this policeman of the world is also helping you live a better life, I think he's contributing towards your development. So I would do, and I have said it many times, I have indeed told many people about my teachers, and I would encourage the support of the work of Peace Corps.
Mr. Murengezi, what would be your message to the Ugandan communities, Ugandan government?
Yes.
You work with the government in
Yes.
terms of supporting Peace Corps,
Yes.
or helping Peace Corps to focus where it matters, where you see that country today needs more support.
I would very much want more support in the Peace Corps, especially in the area of education. You know, education shapes people. It shapes the future generation. And Uganda has gone through very difficult times in the past. Now, once you have gone down in the ditch, it takes a lot of effort to get you out of the ditch. In the process of getting up, I have told you about the inequalities we have now. Education in the upcountry schools is really poor. And once you have very poor education for the future generation, it's a problem really. And to me, I'm glad that Mr. Karl Morhausen is now helping with the National Teachers College, because there you are shaping a teacher to go and shape the young children. It has a big multiplier effect. And I must say I admire Mr. Karl Morhausen. He told me he's an old man, but he still has that determination. Let me go and help other people. That is really very, very commendable. Many people at his age will be looking more at themselves than looking at helping other people. But I must say he's a missionary of a type. So that area of education is very crucial. Shaping our education system, shaping it, maybe supporting our Ministry of Education and the teacher training colleges in order to, you know, Uganda's education system used to be very, very good. But I think over the years it has deteriorated, and we need to do a lot to reshape it. Other areas can come up provided, you know, you shape a child and you shape a nation, we build a nation. Yeah. Of course, there are other areas, gender issues, the African woman, the Ugandan woman, it still has a long way to go. Sometimes when you talk of gender equality, people misunderstand it. But that's another area that needs a lot of support. Yeah. Of course, there are many areas. There are really very many. But I'm thinking of the priorities among priorities.
Now, when the volunteers came, of course, you as a school, you were
Yes.
a community, but
Yes.
volunteers were also viewed by the larger community.
Yes.
Do you have any recollections? What was the community thinking of American volunteers, Peace Corps volunteers being in the community? How were they viewing their presence? What were their interactions? How did that help the community, if at all?
The community is, first of all, as a student, you know you are a student and you don't see much of the community activities. But what I know, typically in such a school, it is deep in the village there. The community sees these bazungu around, and they know these bazungu are teaching our children, so they must be studying the ways of the Americans. Maybe they are shaping you to become people of high technology like America is. that's what I would think, although I didn't do much of looking at what they were contributing toward the community, but I think that's what it was. But on the other hand, the community, of course, appreciates. They could see at that time that Mutolere would produce so many students going to the higher levels, going to higher institutions. When they look at Mutolere today, it's not producing much. It's not producing much. So the community can say, look, those Peace Corps contributed a lot towards our better performance.
Maybe one last question, Mr. Murengezi.
Yes.
Is there anything that you wish that I asked you and I didn't ask you? Anything that you want to share?
Anything that I wanted to share? Anything that I wanted to share, what is it? It's a bit personal, and I explained to my teacher, Mr. Karl Murhausen. And by the way, Mr. Karl, you excuse me if at one time I call you Mr. Karl Mock, because you know there was a man called Mr. Karl Mock, whom I worked with for a long time. So now recently when I came to know you are also Mr. Karl, I said, hey, you know, me and you as Mr. Murhausen. It's only recently that I came to know Mr. Karl Murhausen. But I explained to him as a student in senior 3 how I did that funny thing, and I touched his wife's hair, and I've always wanted to apologize to her really, and even now on camera I wish to apologize to Mrs. Linda Murhausen. That's one of the things, that's one of the reasons I have always looked for them. I wanted to apologize to her to say, look, what I did in senior 3 was really something stupid, and I wish you had rebuked me. Why? Because, you know, in Africa here, the teacher-student relationship is a situation where you do something wrong, the teacher must rebuke you. A student would not volunteer to come and say sorry to my teacher, no. If you come and say sorry to my teacher, you are seen to be, what do you call it, maybe a stubborn boy actually. But now as a mature person, I have always wanted to say sorry to her. And yeah, but of course you wouldn't ask me that question because you didn't know. But I have always had that inside myself. And it's one of the reasons I was really, really happy to see Mr. Karl Murhausen. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you very much.
That's remarkable that all these years,
Yes.
you carried that. That also talks about integrity. So thank
Yes.
you, Mr. Murengezi.
Most welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.